Okay, should we get started? Very good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barb King. I'm a professor in the School of Nursing, and I'm serving as the faculty lead for this year's D&I seminar series, which is hosted by UW-Madison ICTR D&I Launchpad. So for those of you that are just joining us, maybe for the first time or have joined us before, the DRISS, this year, our DRISS series is DRISS Presents TEACH-RS, which is recruitment science. And it's a monthly lunchtime seminar where we learn about dissemination and implementation research and where does recruitment science fit in within that context. So each seminar is going to take place on the second Friday of each month from noon to 1. And it's open to anyone who would like to join us. And also what this seminar also helps us think about is the gaps in recruitment science, but also the gaps in implementation science itself. And then how do we move the needle around taking findings from discovery and implementing that into clinical and community context. So if you're interested in learning more about the seminar series, you can get a hold of Molly or Carmen, and they can make sure that we get you on our mailing list. So today, I'm excited about this panel that we have presenting, which is recruitment through relationship, lessons learned from a community academic research partnership. So for the past 4 years, Erin Hicks and Deb Mejchar and Mike Koenig have been working together. Oh, let me get my script. But working together to develop and lead research projects aimed at improving mental health and well-being among currently and formerly incarcerated individuals. So in this presentation, they will discuss the lessons they have learned regarding recruitment of research participants for these projects. And in particular, they will highlight the critical importance of relationships built on trust and credibility. So Dr. Mike Koenig is a professor in UW-Madison School of Psychiatry. Deb Mejchar is a certified specialist and a certified peer specialist trainer and the former prison chaplain and peer facilitator of restorative justice groups at multiple state prisons. And Erin Hicks has facilitated peer support groups for formerly incarcerated individuals for the past 10 years. He also provides counseling and support to individuals and families affected by violence through focused interruption. Erin has lived experiences of incarceration, and for the past 4 years, he has worked closely with the lab on a variety of grant-funded projects to promote the mental health and well-being of currently and formerly incarcerated individuals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to this panel to present their information to us.
Hey, thanks for having us. And I just want to say thanks, Barb, to you and the ICTR D&I Launchpad crew for taking some leadership on this issue of recruitment science. You know, this is something that a lot of us in research don't get a lot of training on, you know, as we're coming along. And I think that is reflected by some of the issues we have had, you know, collectively in the biomedical research enterprise related to recruitment. You know, I've been on the IRB. I've seen a lot of progress reports and underwhelming recruitment numbers. I've certainly experienced that in my own research, but especially over the last few years through relationship with community, partnering with community, we've overcome a lot of those challenges, and we have some, I think, real significant success stories to share. So before we get into that, I just want to invite our community partners here, Deb and Erin, at the top, just to share, you know, if there's any headlines or things that they want the audience to know right off the bat. Just give them a chance to talk.
I just wanted to be clear that, like, we don't have some big quick fixes here, you know, like overnight fixes. And also, I also want to say that I'm really a visual person. So in my communication, I really kind of draw pictures with words, I guess. So just wanted to explain my communication style. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And I just want to share with you guys that I did just start my own nonprofit. The name of it is the Voices of Power. We are a 501c3 organization. And with that being said, in the process of us doing this presentation, I really want to know from you guys, since you joined us and came to hear this, I want to really know, what do you want to get out of this? So be thinking on that. You can type it in the chat. You can say it out verbally. But I really want to know from your end, what are you seeking for out of this presentation?
So on that note, yeah, feel free at any point. I think you can unmute yourself, video on, if you want to ask a question, share a reaction or reflection. Please do that. We're more than happy to have this go that direction, more of a discussion. I think we'd actually prefer that, more of a conversation, interaction.
Thanks, Christy, for turning on your camera, and I wish other people would, because it's kind of difficult for me to talk to all these names.
Thanks, Kat.
So I'm trying to put this in chat, and then I'm thinking it's just such a long chat. So I think what would be really important is, from your perspective, what has been the experience you've had with researchers that are coming to community and saying, want to get, engagement with this research. I've got this idea. What's that like as a community members? And what are, like, you should know this as a researcher when you approach a community group about engaging their community in research? I think that's really critically important, that we as investigators get a clue. What's that like from the community perspective? I think if you could help us understand that, that would be wonderful.
So you're going to start, Mike? Well, I'll describe something to you that that from the beginning of this collaboration, someone reached out to me and asked me if I knew someone who might be interested. And the woman, Dr. Carmen Alonso, I don't know if some of you know her. And it's just the way she communicates, because she was really asking me if I wanted to be a part of it, because right away she's known me for years. She was a volunteer at the prison where I was a chaplain. And so she just asked me if I wanted to join, and I was like, I'll find someone to join. And I was like, what about me? So that's how it started for me. But I'll describe what I saw from the very beginning, because like I said, I'm a really visual person. So I saw like community, academic research, and Aaron actually was involved before myself, but I saw him and I on this bridge. So we were this bridge between the two. But from the beginning, from the very beginning, I would not have collaborated if I didn't know Mike's, Dr. Koenig's intention, his care, his intention. Because I'm not going to go to the community I'm a part of without knowing someone's integrity and their intention. And so that's what it looked like for me at first. And I had, of course, built relationships in my community. It is, it's a community I'm a part of, our community. And so, especially with individuals who, including myself, who don't have a lot of trust in systems. And so that's what it looked like in the beginning. But what it looks like now, and has looked like for quite a while, is Mike is on the bridge with us. And I don't know if that's a visual and I can communicate. I hope you understand. All right, Mike.
Well, I want Aaron to address that question.
Yeah, I would pretty much echo what Deb said. It's like a bridge. It's like being able to almost experience both worlds, if that makes sense, from the community side, but also from the academic side. And it's really about how do we pull each other back and forth, right? Specifically unfamiliar people, right? And it comes through a process of being vetted. Really about everything that Deb talked about, integrity. Is this just a one and done? Are we talking longevity? Do we have a voice? Can we speak to whatever that issue is? So it's a process. And I love how she framed it in the sense of her experience with systems. And so we kind of sidestepped the system piece so that we could actually build a relationship. Because we understand that in systems, a lot of times it's from one system to another system. There's not really a human piece in that part, even though these are humans and so on and so forth. But from system to system, we've always noticed when it comes to the academic world, people have been very intimidated by it. And some people have had bad experiences as well. And what's interesting is we've been doing this work for about 4 years, and we have went to we went to another state and kind of have heard from individuals from other states about how they have perceived the academic world. And again, it has not always been tasteful for a lot of communities, specifically the community that we represent. So with that being said, we saw the importance of why it needed to be a lot more personal. It needed to be, some questions asked on both ends. And it also needed to be vetting on both ends as well. So from that perspective, currently, I mean, man, you couldn't ask for this. Probably one of the most beautiful relationships you could ever see. You can film it, you can write about it, you can whatever, because it really is just that good. So with that, I'll definitely let you chime in, Mike.
I want to speak to this concept that Deb brought up about a bridge. That is just so critically important when we're thinking about recruitment. And I want to share some of my past experience before I had these relationships and this bridge. So we had done brain imaging research inside state correctional facilities. So that's my PhD background is actually in neuroscience. I did research as a cognitive neuroscientist, and it's a long story how we ended up doing that work, but it wasn't a setting or a community that I had any real connection to. But we were doing brain imaging work inside prisons, and we were getting really high rates of participation. And, our impression from the participants was, they didn't have a lot else going on. They were sort of interested in what we were doing. Some of them expressed, yeah, this is if this is something that I can do that might help someone have a different life than what a different experience than what I'm having, I'm happy to do it. At one point, we tried to extend this work longitudinally. So some of the same people who had participated while they were incarcerated, we asked them after they were released and living in the community whether they might want to participate again. And so at this point, there's a lot more going on in their lives, a lot more stresses and challenges. I think we reached out to approximately 60 people. I think 3 of them called us back. One of them scheduled an appointment and nobody showed up. So that let us know right there, really, what is the investment in that community, in that, type of research. So we had no bridge. We had the work that we were doing was not developed in partnership. Certainly the way we were recruiting and reaching out to people was not done in partnership. Whereas now, and at that time, and a lot of us have probably had this experience, we start to think about recruitment, after we got the grant, maybe even after we're getting, we're in the process of getting a project approved, and our sense of partnership or relationship with community is, can we post our flyer here? You know, I'm guilty of that. You know, I've done that in the past. I think that's how a lot of us, that's the point at which we start to engage or, you know, reach out to community. And I think that's the reason why, you know, recruitment is such a bottleneck in a lot of our research, frankly. Whereas now, when we're recruiting for research, first of all, the research was co-developed in partnership, and so we know that it's addressing something that is of importance and value to the community, and that's a very critical part. And we can talk about that process, but specifically when we're, you know, in the recruitment phase. We, as on the academic side, don't really do any of that now. That's all done through Deb, Aaron, maybe there's other people that we're working with who they've been involved in developing the work. They know me, they know our research team, they know what we're about, and they communicate that within their community, and they have the trust and credibility of those community members that will, you know, create the willingness of them to, you know, to show up and participate and try something. So when Deb is talking about a bridge, that is really, really critical for research. And I'll just say, you know, contrary, you know, or in contrast to our previous research, we couldn't get anybody to show up. We have had advisory boards, other sorts of treatment and peer support groups that we've had no trouble you know, filling with participants. You know, one example, I'm thinking of, well, I'll just go, you know, early on, and I'm sort of rambling here, but I just want to give you a flavor for this. When we were talking about our first advisory group, which I'll actually show you a picture of. Well, I'll show you a picture of in a second. But our first advisory group, I remember Aaron asking me like, well, how many people do you need and when do you need them? And I said, you know, that to me was always going to be the part that where I felt a little bit, you know, reticent about like, well, I'm not sure, you know, what do you think you could do? He's like, people aren't going to be the problem. He's like, if we're doing something real and genuine here, people aren't going to be the problem. And I remember it was like the next week he had, like we were trying to maybe get a group of maybe like 8 to 10 women and 8 to 10 men to come together. And I'm like, this could take months. And, you know, it was literally the next week. He's like, I got more than enough. There, you know, they'll show up because of the credibility he has in that community. Another example, with our, we developed a trauma treatment group in collaboration with certified peer specialists with the lived experience of trauma incarceration. We had at one point a waiting list of, I think, over 100 people reached out to contact us. Because they had heard about this treatment group. They heard about it through the agency in the state that does peer specialist training, because Deb is connected with that group. That's another example. We had a community advisory board that just wrapped up its last meeting after 2 years. We had people it was once a month on a Wednesday night, and we had people who would come from an hour or more away. One guy, over the course of the advisory board meeting over the 2 years, moved to Iowa, North Liberty, Iowa, which is just a little north of Cedar Rapids. It's almost 3 hours away from here. He would drive from north. We offered to do it over Zoom. He didn't want to, just because he got so much value out of being in that room and having his voice respected. He drove almost 3 hours from Iowa to our meeting on Wednesday night and drove home at the end of it. So that's, you know, when Deb talks about, you know, the relationship, and Aaron talks about, you know, the investment, that's, you know, what we're talking about. So maybe I'll pull up these images just so you can see, but I'll ask maybe Deb and Aaron to elaborate a little bit more on, from their perspective, what is that experience, or how do they see the value that they bring in being that bridge, specifically in terms of recruitment, you know, communicating the opportunity to participate in the study, what that's like to, you know, reach out to community members.
So when we're speaking to our community members, we're valued and trusted in that community. And I guess it depends on what kind of research you're doing, what community you would be reaching out to, or your colleagues. And so if you have someone reaching out to their own community, those would have to be some pretty, empowered individuals already in that community, strong relationships, which Aaron and I both have in our community. And we would have to be able to, we're not going to do anything to risk the trust and faith, or whatever you want to call it, that members in our community have in us and that we have in other members of our community. So that's a number one. So I would say, to be able to recruit someone in different communities, someone like Aaron or myself, I would think you would need to explain to somebody why you're doing this work. I mean, a lot of, especially people in my community, can see right through people, because a lot of us made our living prior to incarceration being able to see through people, and we have really strong skill sets in that. So people would be able to see through you. So what is the value of what you're doing? Why are you doing this work? Are you just chasing dollars? What is the reason for this work? What's going to come out of it? Is it going to be as important as something can be, is it going to be stuck in a notebook somewhere, in a document? So I don't know. That's what came up for me to share.
And I would always just, with that being said, it in the most simplest way, it's really about how, what's your intent? From my world, one of the things we say, fair exchange is never a robbery, right? So if we mutually benefiting from this, you know what I mean, where we don't feel like, we've been tore down, or, being re-traumatized in any way, shape, or form. But if we can see the fair exchange in what we bring to the table and vice versa, I think that's where we start to really build off of from that point on. What this can look like. This is, and to the point that Deb made, she hit it right on the head. We do want to know what your intent is. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? Because it's like, on one end, you are basically in our lives, asking us questions about our lives, how we got to where we are, so on and so forth. And I think, again, fair exchange is never a robbery. If we're going to have a conversation, I think it should be mutual. I would like to understand who I'm talking to, and what's your intent, despite the fact that, the roles may look a little different, or we're on different sides, or however you want to paint the picture. But at the end of the day, in order for it to be effective, I believe strongly we have to have some type of commonality, common ground, and actually have some real conversations about your why and vice versa. Can we just pause for just a quick second, just because I just wanted to know, did anyone have any thoughts, questions, anything?
Kat's got her hand up. Go ahead, Kat.
Hi. So I really appreciate that this is so clearly all based in relationship. Everything's based in relationship. Relationship with researcher, relationship with community, relationship with the team. And two things that sometimes are tensions are the speed at which work needs to get done from a university side, and the speed of trust and community and lives, and that tension. So speed. And then the outcome, what a researcher needs to share with a grantor, or what a researcher needs to get tenure, and what people need in their lives. That's their fair exchange. That's their priority. So those two issues of timing and speed of trust, and outcomes, and what needs to happen that's a benefit, I'm wondering if you could all speak to for a minute.
Yeah, I'll speak to the second thing first, and we'll come back to speed, because I think I saw there's a question from Molly in the chat about how to make change within rigid systems. And I think it's really the same answer in a way, which is that and the rigid system could be, we could be talking about the university and the research enterprise as a whole, or we could be talking about corrections. But I think the answer is the same, which is that you really need to understand the priorities of the stakeholders involved, and we need to make sure that the work we're doing addresses those. I don't think, as much as we would want to say, hey, we have this new idea, this new approach for doing things, and we want all these structures to change around us to accommodate that, that's not likely to happen. And so I think we communicate very clearly about, at least I'll say this for on my side as a researcher, I say, one of the things I bring to the partnership in terms of communication and transparency is like, we need to get grants to fund this work. That's part of my job. We eventually need to have papers, and where I am in my career, that may be a different sort of pressure than someone earlier in their career who's pre-tenure. And I think that's a very important thing for us to start to talk about as a university, how we value that work and how to make sure that people have the time and space to develop partnerships, which relates to your first question, which we'll get to about speed. So I think, on the second thing first, like, it's just very important to understand what are the marks you need to hit. And I'm speaking obviously from the perspective of a researcher, and that your partners understand that too. And that you're not, trying to keep that to the side and, try to negotiate that over here while you sort of negotiate that in a way that, you think they either wouldn't understand or couldn't understand. So I think that's important to get that all out the table. And even if the community that you work with has different priorities than maybe the institutions that you work in, you find a way to accommodate, both in the research, and you discuss if there's trade-offs, by doing things that way. But that's what I would say about that part. And so, Debbie, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, or if you want to talk about speed.
I just to follow up. So like when I said the thing about, like there's certain tools, benchmarks, whatever stuff that comes with being in academia and research that are sort of like what I think of as like eating your vegetables stuff. Like I just have to do this. Like I don't, like for example, if everybody thinks that if something passes IRB, that it's ethical or going to promote equity, that is way too low of a bar. And so you get into this area where, like Deb, I'm thinking of, the words that you were using, and you too, Erin, and it's interesting because as scientists, I think we find like a lazy sense of comfort in saying like the right things and saying, I'm doing this approach, where the words that you were using are things like integrity. They're like aspects of somebody's personhood. Yeah, so I don't know. It strikes me that there's lots of room to do better within what those tools are, the vegetables that we have to eat, and to make them more realistically line up with the kind of conversations that you want to be having, to be sure that you're not unwittingly or purposefully robbing people of their experience or introducing something that isn't going to benefit them. So like one of the things that I guess I was thinking of very specifically, and if you guys have any experience or thoughts on this, but the idea of like providing informed consent and like really understanding what you're agreeing to and participating in research. There's the bedrock of the trust and being vetted. But then what are some other things, once that's established, that you've found to be helpful in making sure that people understand what they're committing to, see value in it, and know what the trade-offs may be?
Well, so from the very beginning, that consent, we explained what we were up to, what the lab was up to, right? They weren't exact, there was some similarities, but there was differences also that we were up to, that the lab was up to something else. So we explained those, and I remember early on, Aaron had 12 men to come, and I had 12 women, and very early on in that consent, we changed because of the participants, because we didn't want to be a part of a program. Like, we were tired of that word. I don't even really use that word, because I was never programmed. No one ever could program me, and I don't want to program anyone else. Like, I don't want to case manage. I've never been a case, and I can barely manage myself, let alone someone else trying to manage me. So from the beginning, it was quite interesting that that changed to initiative. So our intent and our community's intent is to, I can just never tell when I'm going to get choked up, right? Is to change the way the delivery of initiatives, or that Department of Corrections in Wisconsin calls programs, is to change the way that they're delivered, and whose voice and whose value and who has the wisdom and who has, who's the expert, is someone who's formerly incarcerated, which I am, and others in the women's and men's groups so that's kind of how it started. And it was like, a fire got lit. It was totally amazing. Mike shared a little bit. He was going to show you some pictures and some posters, but so much has come out of those very beginning 12, that all that data and research has been collected and turned in, but that's very much still alive. That's the difference. It's although all that is still very much alive. So, okay, I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you, Deb.
Great question.
Can everyone see this picture? Deb and Aaron, do you want to this was those first groups that Deb, that we've talked about. This was when this is kind of what all kicked it off and lit the fire.
So when I look at this picture, I look at every woman in this picture I served some kind of time with, and except for the woman on the end here, that's Antonia Van. She has Asha Project in Milwaukee, and she actually came into the prison. Oh yeah, Karen's back there. I never did any time with her, but right here is Antonia, and she actually came in the prison, and simply because the reason I went to her group, she came in to see about us. She's formerly incarcerated herself. Really, the reason I followed her into the room was because I hadn't seen anybody. When she came into the prison, she was really sharp dressed, and I hadn't seen that for a long time. And in my community, even though it was a criminal community, the way somebody dressed when they came to see you or visit you, and it's still very strong in my community, speaks to their value, how valuable I am to them. And I'm telling you, after serving a sentence in the Wisconsin Department of Corrections prisons, and also as a chaplain there. And yes, I did come to work sharp every day. People dressed at work like they shop somewhere where his shoes are pinned to the dress, right? So, but the people inside the prison, what speaks to how valuable someone thinks they are, how valuable their voice is, and what's inside them, sometimes is judged by our community, by the way someone looks when they approach us. And it's not superficial. I think it does speak to it because I know a lot of state employees that get dressed up to go to their other state jobs, but do not get dressed up when they're coming into prison that day. So I might have got way off track there. Did I?
A little bit, but I think you touched on something important about maybe about value, like how you approach someone and how, not just how you're dressed, because I agree that's not the main point, but like what you're showing about how you value them, you know, in a relationship like this. So I mean, that might be something to touch on here. I do, before I lose the train of thought though, because Molly brought up something so very important now that she unpacked her question a little bit, that I want to touch on. So yeah, like how do we start to, you know, when we recognize the values of true partnership and we see some disparity in terms of like how the university does something or how something's done by way of procedure or process, how do we start to, you know, reconcile that or rectify that? And one of the greatest gifts that Aaron has brought to me in our relationship and partnership is the question why. He has asked that so many times and has caused me to reflect on, examine, like, yeah, why do we do things that way? And really, you know, come up with an answer, you know, come up with an answer for that. And, you know, Molly, you mentioned the IRB, that was one of those things, where we started talking about, you know, who is tasked with evaluating whether this is ethical or responsible research for somebody who's been impacted in this way. And I'm actually really proud to say that Aaron is now a member of the IRB for that exact reason, because, you know, he asked a lot of questions like, well, who, you know, there, for those of you who don't know, there is a federal requirement that there has to be a representative on the IRB. They call it a prisoner representative, which that term is so wrong-headed from the outset. I mean, that just speaks a lot to how much thought went into that. But that, I believe, at our institution had never been a person who had actually been incarcerated, if you can believe. So that's something that we have changed. And I just believe, you know, and it's not just him. And Deb, you're not actually going to those IRB meetings, Deb, but there is at least one other person who is. And I think that over time, as they start to learn those processes and communicate, that there is a lot that will change. And so Molly, I think the answer to that question is, you know, pull up a seat at the table for them. Pull up a seat at the table for these impacted individuals. And, you know, it's going to take some time, and we've taken the time. And this gets back to Kat's question, which I haven't forgot about, of like, how do you really start to develop a shared understanding of, you know, and again, I give Aaron so much credit for, he never took for granted that, oh, that's just how the way the university operates, and that's the way it's got to be because that's the way it's always been. And so I think having people like Aaron in these spaces and more, and we have ideas for what those spaces, you know, might start to look like and who could be there. I think there's so much room for growth and change. And it's not like a trade-off. Like I'll admit I'm guilty, and I know I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but for researchers who look at the IRB as this is the bar that I have to cross, and if I'll get an inch over that, and then I'm going to start my study, right? Because we see that as a barrier to our work. A lot of, you know, it almost becomes like antagonistic. I've been on the IRB. I know how it feels on both sides of that. But when you really you know, understand that at the, you know, apart from all the different regulations, right, which we all get caught up on, but the true intent there is a protection, you know, of people who may be vulnerable. And you start to talk with your community partners about that, you get to a point where, like, we're doing things in our studies, for example, and this relates directly to recruitment, where we have an informed consent. So rather than just, you know, here's the document and a brief description, we have people from the community, Deb, Aaron, others. We had this thing, I guess we call it information session, for, you know, for lack of a better term, where we have Deb, if there's a clinician involved, the actual clinician themselves is there to meet the people, right? To be available to them, to, start to develop some kind of relationship, explain the study. And we're not pushing a consent form in front of them at that point. It's just a chance, be in the space that they're going to be in for the study, see the other people who might be there. So that's one example of a specific thing where, we could certainly meet the bar of the IRB without doing something like that. But that's not the point, right? And it's not a trade-off. By doing that, we're going to increase our enrollment and recruitment, right? And that's, I guess, what I've been, and even, to one of the points earlier about like, well, as a researcher, we got to get these grants, we got to get these papers. Like these have not been trade-offs. So the time that I have invested in my, the other members of my lab have invested in these relationships. Now, when we write a grant, like think about, at least those of you who write NIH grants, significance is the, number one, criterion in terms of the score sheet. And that can be hard, right? To make that case when you're saying, well, this study says this and this study says that. But if you have months or years of input from people of that community, and you can draw on that and say the people who actually have this lived experience are saying this is the thing that's significance to them, right? Not that so imagine yourself as a reviewer of grants, and I've been in these shoes too, and you see that communicated clearly in a grant, right? You're not appealing to the literature or what some other academic said, but this is through the voices of people who have this lived experience. They're saying that this is important. This is what we need for our community. That's not a trade-off. That helps you with grants. And so I guess I haven't encountered anything yet where it has felt like, because I have made this time and investment in community partnership, that it's a trade-off or a loss or anything to the detriment of what I have to do, in my professional, whatever, milieu.
Mike, can I just recognize Karen McCoy over there? I think, is there any other grad student or lab staff on here? I was trying to look, but I just wanted to recognize Karen McCoy and all the hard work that she does, keeping so much together. That's a big part of our collaboration as well. And from the beginning, it was Talia, right? Mike, Talia. And, we spend time with them as well. Like, even it's just coffee or just, it's not just collaboration, it's relationship.
Thank you, Deb. I appreciate both you and Aaron a lot. And you, Mike. Thank you.
I wanted to, before we moved on, though, I wanted to hear from you, Barb, because you had your hand up, and I didn't want to miss that either, because you had something good for us, too.
And Mike, remember when we did those focus groups and we were trying to figure out like what are the needs of our investigators related to recruitment science, and Kat, you can speak to this with Just Research in the surveys you guys have done. And I think what is striking for investigators is they understand this is really important, that I think about trust building and these relationships, and they think about that. They don't know how. They don't know how to even start engaging in that. Like where are the steps and how do I actually start doing that? So I think the strategies you guys are talking about are emphasizing what's important. And I love, Deb, when you said how you dress. And it's how you present yourself is critical, not only physically, but the way you speak and how you talk to people. How do you value them? They're there and they're providing you critical information and guidance that you can't get any other way. And I think about it as researchers, how do we authentically do that with our community is really, I think, a critical need. And we have to figure out, how do we coach? How do we help people move along that continuum? I think is really important. And I do just want to follow up by this. So much has been talked about. These important ideas, lived experiences with this panel, I think will really help individuals that are on this presentation maybe think a little deeper. Like, what happens when I wrote my IRB, I'm ready to start my study. You know, my partners are hospitals. So how do I build those trusting relationships with hospitals who there's high risk? If I say you kind of are screwing up here, there's high risk for those organizations to want to continue to work with me or continue to change a healthcare system. So I think even something as simple as, and the BOAs do this, our Board of Older Adults, and I think maybe CARDS do, Cat, bio sketches. So when I presented to my the BOAs, I had a bio sketch of every single one of those CAB members, and they were amazing to read. So now I understood them a little bit more. And they had my bio sketch. So when I first met with them, it wasn't like, here's what my idea. It was really about, who are you? Who are you? And really, why am I coming to that group? And I just think we can't miss that critical step.
I saw your hand, Ms. Sullivan. We're gonna jump in 1 second. I just want to respond to you real briefly. And so a lot of times when I frame things, it's just kind of my wiring. It's around scripture. And there's a scripture and it says, study to show thyself approved. And a lot of times we leave it to just like a church setting, but I believe strongly, if you're going to enter into a community, it's your obligation to at least take the time to study that community, right? And so, for example, Deb was talking about language. A lot of times, we'll call people, inmates or, like a subject or, those type of things. Being conscious of when you're entering into a community, I need to know the language, what I should be saying and also what I should not be saying, because it could come off offensive. And if we have not taken the time to study to show thyself approved, that's going to come off. We're going to read that right away. Like, why are you saying that? Like, why do you keep saying inmate? Or you continue to keep saying offender, those type of things. Like, that's not my name, nor is that how I want to be addressed. It would be like you did something wrong and we only addressed you by what you did wrong. And we would just be preferred to just be addressed as a person by my name, no more, no less. So those are the things that, can be tweaked in a very real way. It's a low hanging fruit, but it's something that you can change, that you will create some relatability, because I see you talking to me like a person and not like, whatever. So I just wanted to throw that at you. And I wanted to jump into your question because I knew you had something good for us as well, Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you. I was trying to figure out how to raise my electronic hand and I am not seeing an option. So this is super interesting, super helpful. One of the things that, I'm thinking about that I think relates a little bit to what Kayla put in the chat there is, we've spent some time focusing on what researchers attempting to kind of unpack the way in which we've been educated and trained to work and approach the community with whom we wish to partner. But one of the things that really strikes me as incredibly powerful is, and I think a lot of us here on this call attempt to grapple with that. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's hard sometimes for researchers to become increasingly flexible and really community advocates, to move this from scientist to move from researcher to really full engagement and stretching those roles in a way that, academics is going to accept, to Kayla's point, is one thing. But I'm really struck by how Deb and Erin, as a result of your experiences, including happening to develop the relationship with Mike, you have become community scientists in a way, and so I would love to hear more about that that movement, because I think we need movement on both ends, to make this kind of collaboration grow and enhance the effectiveness of the research being done. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what is it that motivates people to, from the community, start reaching out and becoming researchers and scientists themselves. You know what I mean?
And I think you use the word, we educate, because we're educated as well, right? We're not educated maybe in academia, but we have an education. And so we educate each other. Does that make sense? And so we start fitting in each other's world where it's not separate anymore. I think, Aaron? I don't know. I could go on and on, but I think that I just keep saying that over and over.
No, you smacked that on. Let me say it like this. I know maybe it's not supposed to be this way, and I don't know like what is the parameters. I'm always trying to figure out what is the guidelines, what is the rule. The truth of the matter is, me personally, but us collectively, myself and Deb, we love Mike, period. Like, and because of that, as long as he chooses to work with me, he ain't never got to recruit. Like he never has to have his students go recruit. He don't have to do any of that. Like, because we understand now, the more we understand, the more we can make this relationship that much more stronger. We can do things on our ends that you guys may be restricted and vice versa. And so it's about a give and take, but ultimately when you build camaraderie, when you build these type of relationships, ultimately it's how do we best fill in the blanks for you and vice versa? How can you help fill in the blanks for us? And that's where the give and take comes in, but it's all about our relationship, like at the end of the day. And you're actually understanding that you're going to be educated too, as well. It's not going to be one sided. It's actually going to be two sided. So to the point that you made about our expertise, you're 100% right, because we are really showing like how you can get the community to actually move. But again, it's based on relationships, because if we didn't have any relationships in the community that we have, we couldn't show up with 24 people in a week. Like, who does that? Like, that's not possible, but we can do that because we interact with these people every single day. So they just need to know that from the community side, like, you're not going to do nothing to hurt them or harm them, right? Or you're not going to be trying to run, research that's going to, do things to make them look, like a horrible person or something. So as long as they know that they're safe and they trust myself and Deb, then running out of people won't even be an option. And I mean that so wholeheartedly. Like, the people will never be an issue, but it will be an issue only if, on the flip side, people's hearts are not right and they have intentions to do harm and not good. So,
from early on, it was easy to explain to our community as well that that lab, Mike's lab, was not just checking boxes. And literally, I'm telling you, it was very important to our community, because the last thing we want anything to do with is a box. We had to live in one. So we're not trying to hang out with checking boxes, or we didn't have to, Mike wouldn't go, well, let's schedule, I drive all over the state to different prisons, and I would just call him from the car. I'd have a couple hour trip ahead of me, and I'd just call him and he'd answer. And if we lost our signal, he'd call back and want to finish the conversation. I mean, this is all, it wasn't a game though. It wasn't a game for him. We knew that right away. We know what game looks like. It wasn't a game for him. It was intention reality, and it was the same intentions that we have, just from a different angle.
And just in that part, one thing that we did that I don't know if you guys are restricted to or not, but on our end, one thing that we did a lot of laughing. I don't know if y'all can laugh. Okay, I see some smiles. Okay. So you guys can laugh. All right. So that's good to know. That's good. That's good to know, because sometimes we're in meetings where it's like it's just a dry eye commercial. I don't know if you ever seen the dry eye commercial. I'm kind of silly, so I can't do dry eye. So that's not how we got to laugh at least one time. So, but that's just knowing that people are still human. Like, you know, yeah, that was huge. Those things were huge. Not all the time, but one time we actually did a Zoom right from his bedroom. So I was so proud of him for so proud of you for that. That will stick with me for the rest of my life. I didn't even think y'all could do stuff like that. So
We were
that was
like, is that a headboard behind you? What the heck?
Funny.
So it's that, I mean, I think you're kind of getting that, like it's showing up as a person, you know what I mean? I think so often as academics, we're showing up, we're leading with our CV, right? In the letter, and we think that's what's going to create a relation. And when we talk about relationship, like these this is a very different kind of a different kind of relationship than what we're used to in collaboration with colleagues. And I think you just really have to recognize that. And it's, you know, and it's throughout the lab. I'm really glad that Deb, you know, called out Karen in this, mentioned her and some other students in the lab, because this is part of our lab culture. Like they, you know, everybody from me to, you know, the research assistants, the students in the lab, it's all, you know, they have their own relationships, you know, with our community partners. It doesn't all get like funneled through me. It's not all funneled through work, you know, and I think that's fantastic. It's just it's a different approach. I know we just have a couple of minutes left. I do want to, you know, because Kayla asked a really good question about what things can researchers, academics do to make collaborative spaces that value community voice, empower folks. Think about them as your expert colleagues and collaborators. So like when I get invited to do a talk, whether it's a class or something like this, I say I want to bring 1 or 2 people with me. Because, right, there's the part that I'm an expert on and can speak to, but there's parts that I am not the expert on that they can speak to. We talk about, you know, having our own distinct lanes. And whatever that professional venue is for you, something might be a class, might be an invited talk, a paper. Deb and Aaron are co-authors on papers submitted to, you know, peer-reviewed academic journals. And really just start to think about that, like where, you know, what invitations do I get that I can, you know, bring somebody along. And I think, you know, Deb and Aaron can speak to this, but I think it's, you know, they start to build their confidence in those settings as well, and start to maybe see themselves that, you know, that way. And yeah, to me, it just snowballs and keeps building.
And we've brought you along into different circles inside the prisons. And also that big conference for all the deputy wardens, that national, where we all presented on some of our work.
Yeah.
So that's back and forth too.
Yeah. One thing I want to do real quick, I want to show you one flyer, and just because I know this is about recruitment, I do want to, let me just show this. This is a flyer from one of our studies. Oh, what do I have up there? Wrong picture. Deb, do you just want to comment on this quick? I'm sorry if we're going to just run it like a minute over time about like why the flyer looks like this. You're on mute, Deb.
Is this for the upcoming group? No, this was the group that already happened, right?
Yeah, this is one that
Finished?
yeah.
Yeah. So there's a certified peer specialist, that's Dennis Franklin, and he's been a part of, you know, this community and this work in other areas. And then Edwin is the right, he's the group therapist, the clinician, the person with this written on his CV, right? So, but it's so powerful. The first time we recruited, I know about the women's one, and I had the privilege of working with Dr. Kate Walsh in one group, and then another one in UWM. And in early recruitment, we did get enough people to have information sessions with, and then go through the process, but it has done nothing but grow. The first time Kate and I had 35 possibilities, I think it was, Karen, you were a part of that. We had 35 possibilities. The next 6 months later, for another group, we had 140 applicants. And I think the first time we had 35 applicants. That's right. And the second time it had went up to 140 because in a community, word spreads. You all know that. So what a privilege to be able to speak to this group today. It's a privilege. We're
Well,
just all part of the same world, right? I mean, we all probably have the same intention to make this world better. And we're better together, really.
Yeah. So if we can, man, if we ever can come together again or whatever, if you can see, you know, how we can be useful to you guys, please don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Appreciate you guys for listening.
Well, that concludes the seminar, which we could probably continue to go on for the next hour. So it was really, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us all today. Greatly appreciated. And I think I personally have had a good growth here in the last hour. So thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
See you guys.
Good weekend. Stay warm
Here.
if possible.